Welcome to the next step in our journey through the art of the Church of St. John the Divine. Today we begin a 4-week series that walks us through the stained glass windows that are part of the chapel's southern wall. These windows depict the 8 Beatitudes, words given to us by Jesus Christ in his Sermon on the Mount as found in the Gospel of Matthew. We encourage you to reflect and respond to each one. Listen to the words and ponder how you might apply them to your life today and tomorrow. Once again, we have the Reverend Dr. Doug Richnow to take us on this next step of our visual and spiritual journey as he guides us through the first 2 windows that reflect the Beatitudes.
We're going to look at 8 stained glass windows that form on the south side of the chapel. And these depict the 8 Beatitudes that are spoken by Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount. It's in chapter 5 of Matthew is where we see these. They're appropriately effective for us in our spiritual growth because these Beatitudes, even the word itself is Beatitude. It's about what attitude can you have in your life as a Christian to be different from what the world would have you be. So we're going to look at these 8 beautiful, beautiful windows that adorn the south side of the chapel here. And each one of them is going to have a central depiction with the Beatitude written out, and then a couple of other things on the top and bottom that if you look carefully, you're going to see things that you never would have known are there. Because it's so easy to just get caught up in the one picture and not see. The technique that stained glass artists would do is to put little things in there that told a whole another part of the story and go with the main picture. So in this main picture, the Beatitude is, "Blessed are they who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." The main depiction here is Jesus with his hands tied. He's been flogged by the Roman officers. You've got 2 Roman soldiers here and the crown of thorn, which they shoved on his head. They stripped him down of his garments to his waist. And then they began to beat him and flog him. And over here, these small little images of people who are the bystanders, who were jeering, who were spitting on him and were mocking him and helping him to feel not only the pain, but the humility that he had to go through. And so here on the top, you have a spear and a stick with a sponge on it. You know the story when Jesus was on the cross? The soldier pierced him in the side to see if he was dead, see if he would flinch. And then you have the dice from the soldiers gambling to see who would get his cloak that he was wearing. And so there's the sponge of vinegar when he cried out, "I thirst." They thrust a sponge of vinegar up into his face on a stick. Here is the crown of thorns, as I said. And down here is one of the most interesting things that I find in all of these windows, and that is, this is a whip, and that is a depiction of the whip that they would have used to beat Jesus. They would have stripped him down, had him lean over, and then whip him with a cat of 9 tails, is the way I would describe it. Multiple cords on a wooden handle, and in that, leather cords, they would put shards of bone, which were very, very sharp. They'd cut a hole, put it in there, wet it, and they would hold it in there. They also put little lead weights in it to give it something to throw it. And what would happen is they would throw it around, hit you in the back, and the long cords would come across to the front. And then the soldier would rip it like that, and the bones would rip into the skin. Not so much to draw blood, but to cause your body to bleed a small amount and to let bodily fluids come out so you were dehydrated and suffering even more. And this is exactly what it would have looked like. The artist knew that and just tucked that in there as a weapon and an implement that would have been very cruel and torturous. We're told in Scripture that Jesus had to suffer all of these things, and it had to be a cruel suffering so that there's nothing we'll ever go through in our life that God himself, as the Son of God, does not already know. He sits as our advocate at the right hand of God and is able to know everything we feel because he's been mocked, he's been beaten, he's been tortured, he's been abandoned by his own friends. There's nothing you and I can go through that Christ himself did not, in his humanity, experience. He knows our pain. He knows our suffering. And so the Beatitude tells us how blessed it is those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Now these Beatitudes, when they said how blessed, that's not meaning it's happy and it's wonderful. It means, oh, how blessed you are if you have the opportunity to be persecuted for righteousness' sake, because that means you're doing what God has called you to do, and the world is responding to you. And Jesus was the perfect example of that. In this picture of the Beatitude, it's blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. It's one of my favorites because of the interpretation of the word meek. Here we have Jesus riding on a donkey, which was a very humble animal. And Jesus is, you might think, well, he's being very meek, riding on a donkey. But the word meek is a Greek word that's used in the Bible. It's the word praus, P-R-A-U-S. Praus is a word that translates to what would be described, it's almost like an equestrian term. It describes taking a wild horse, a wild animal, and taming him by the reins, being able to get him to where he responds to the direction of the master. And so what this is saying is, blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth, isn't saying to be meek and weak. It means to be under the control of God and allowing yourself not to be wild and crazy and bucking, but to be controlled and useful to God. And so we read this in a different way when we know the interpretation of that Greek word meek, which is the word praus, that it means to be under control and have your life in a way that responds to the guidance of your master. And we respond to the guidance of God through the commands that he gives us, through the lessons he has given us through the prophets, and through the stories he's given us through Jesus and his sacrifice.
We invite you to join us again next week when the Reverend Dr. Doug Richnow will continue our journey, looking, hearing, and meditating on the next two Beatitude windows. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for they shall inherit the kingdom of heaven. And blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted. Until then, walk in love.